I would like to learn about you as a contingent worker and the factors that contributed to your role before and during your time as a contingent worker in the mental health industry. We will use several questions to guide this conversation. It is not required that you share names of specific people or organizations if you are not comfortable doing so. Throughout the interview, I will use the terms contingent worker and client organization. Contingent worker includes those positions designated as temporary, contracted, per diem, and or fee-for-service. Client organization refers to the company for which you provided services and does not include staffing agencies. Starting with question 1. Do you currently work as a contingent worker?
No. Yes? No.
When did you work as a contingent worker and how long were you at that status?
From 2013 to 2017.
So 4 years.
Yeah.
What brought you into contingent work? For example, what was the recruitment process like, or the onboarding, or how did you learn about contingent work?
Well, I actually saw, on Indeed, a job for an LC, and I had previously worked full-time as an LC, so I applied for the job, and then I didn't know at the time, but it was going to a staffing agency. And so I went in for the interview through the staffing agency, and then they placed me. And then I was just there. I've just been there since then.
Okay. What was your job title as a contingent worker?
Lead clinician.
When you first were introduced to the role, how was the job described to you?
You mean the roles and responsibilities?
Yeah.
From Climber or from staffing agency?
Just in terms of what it meant to be a lead clinician.
That I would be providing individual and group therapy, and documenting notes. I had already worked as a lead clinician, so I was fully familiar with the job. So I already knew. They just told me basically how they kind of ran things. But basically that I'd be providing therapy, working with schools and families.
Okay. How about when you first started out as a contingent worker, unknown to the field before?
Well, I was. What do you mean?
So when you first were told that it was a temporary assignment or a temporary position, contracted, how was the idea of a contingent worker described to you?
They told me that the billable hour. They told me that I would working billable hours, and certain amount of hours each week. If there weren't extra hours or extra clients to be working with, then I was done for the week. And then if there were extra hours, I would be able to see those clients and bill for them.
Okay. So just describe what it meant to you to be a contingent worker when you first started.
That I would have flexibility, that I was giving them my schedule, that I told them my availability, and that the placement where I was, I was in charge telling them when I was available. And I liked the flexibility of that. And then I could be assigned at a different placement at any time. The need is where I would go where there is need.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your overall expectation of the role?
I think, I would go in, I would see my clients, and I would leave. I think, I think it met, I think it met my expectations. I think that part of it, doing the paperwork was a little challenging to fit that in. Being an independent contractor, because as a full-time clinician, you could do your paperwork whenever, but as an independent contractor, it was a little bit more difficult for me to work that into my time.
Okay.
But that's it was as expected.
Okay. What did you learn was the client organization's expectation of your role?
I think that initially it started out same expectations, I would work, and then I think over the years we would get more work, and we were expected to still work that in or do unbillable work. And so I think it shifted over the years.
Okay.
To do jobs to do assignments or tasks that weren't in our job role.
Okay. So would you say these expectations similar or different?
I'd say they were different.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say they started out initially the same, and then it evolved into different expectations.
So how did the similarities at first impact your working agreement, and then how did the differences impact it once there started to be those differences?
What was the first part of the question?
How did the similarities impact the working agreement?
Okay.
And then when there started to become differences, how did that impact your working
I felt like initially I was very supported. I felt like the similarities, like everybody was on the same page of the expectations, so I felt like I was really contributing. If there were things that, if I was asked to do something outside of my role, I was more apt to do it because it was a very rare occurrence.
Right.
And then as the differences started to come in, I felt less supported and I felt a lot more pressure. And then I felt like it made things a lot more difficult because it took my focus away from my clients and my actual work with them.
Okay. So bouncing off of that question, describe in more detail some of those expectations of your role that may not have been in the job description.
So like the differences you said? I mean, for me personally, let's see. I don't know, like the surveys that we had to do with the parents. Let me think. In mom brain. I think just like little mundane things that they would throw we would get, or they would be thrown in, and we could I guess technically we could tie them into the role, but it really wasn't for us clinically. It wasn't clinical to us and on our work, but it had, the company needed the data, so they figured out a way to tie it into clinical work, even though it didn't drive we weren't using it to drive our treatment.
Okay.
So like, for example, the surveys, we have conversations with the parents all the time, but we needed to conduct these surveys. I'm trying to think what else there were. Or even attending meetings after we were billed out for a student. Can you just go and give your input? So even though we were billed out for that client, and I would have to say many times, or like if a BSC or a mobile therapist came and stopped in the school and we were with another client or we were billed out, we would still have to step aside and meet with this person. And there were times where I would say, if they would call up to the office, I would say, I'm unavailable today. Here's my phone number. You can call me next week.
Right.
So you had to kind of explain to them. And I used to, when we had similarities, I used to go ahead and go above and beyond and take that unbillable conversation. But as these expectations kept piling on as an expectation, not like a favor, I really was saying like, no, I'm not talking to them today. They can call me next week. Where I'm with a client now,
right.
I'm not stepping. A parent's calling me. They can wait, or they can call me back later. Like, I'm not stepping away. So the differences really made me kind of like form really concrete boundaries.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So where did those expectations come from?
I think like management and like, again, the company needs data. They need data for the insurance companies to get funding. Like, it all comes from money.
Right.
And then, and it just trickles down, and we're the ones who have to do the work for it, even though we as clinicians don't need the data.
Right.
We have to work it in and then report it back. So I think it can't come from higher up.
Fair enough. So has anything happened while working for a client organization that has surprised you?
I think the amount of like turnover, I think, I think for me working at Climber, and then also as an independent contractor, there's a lot of turnover in the teachers, there's a lot of turnover in clinicians, just because of the nature of, it's not, clinicians weren't full-time, teachers weren't tenured, so there's a lot of turnover and constantly having to rebuild relationships. It's not like you just pick up and continue. You have to rebuild that rapport and the relationship with the teacher, with the students, with the families. So that was surprising. There's no long term
like continuity.
Yeah.
what have you experienced that has influenced your decision to leave a particular client organization?